Dr. Ospino is a consultant for the USCCB Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism and currently serves as an associate director. He is director of graduate programs in Hispanic Ministry at Boston College. This keynote presentation outlines a theology of accompaniment for vocational discernment grounded in the lived experience of missionary disciples living amidst diversity and change today. His presentation is entitled Call to Accompany God's People in a Time of Paradigm Change. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ospino.
Some of the ideas, thoughts, reflections that I will share with you are about realities that most of us actually do not control at all. And frankly, there is little that we can do to control the overall realities. We must respond to them, and that's why we need to know them. And I'm going to walk you through a number of realities that are reshaping Catholicism in the United States of America. First of all, it is a pleasure to be with you this morning as part of this 2018 National Religious Vocation Conference in Buffalo, New York. I'm grateful to the organizers for the invitation and to all of you for making the time to get together to reflect about how we can promote ecclesial vocations in more effective ways, responding to the signs of the times in which we live. I want to invite you to do this morning by paying attention to various paradigm changes. And I'm using this word borrowing from Pope Francis, paradigmatic changes, that define the lives of Catholics in this country, and to take one more view at the theological concept of accompaniment. There is no doubt that a combination of cultural, demographic, and technological and global dynamics are challenging many taken for granted convictions regarding how we understand our shared humanity and our Christian faith in the U.S. It is precisely in this context that all Catholics, especially those dedicated to helping others to discern ecclesial vocations and to nurturing them, are invited to discern how God calls women and men to service, as well as the type of accompaniment that is required to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. Pope Francis says in The Joy of the Gospel, number 73, quote, "New cultures are constantly being born in these vast new expanses, where Christians are no longer the customary interpreters or generators of meaning." We are not that anymore, the primary. Instead, they themselves take from these cultures new languages, new symbols, messages, and paradigms, which propose new approaches to life, approaches often in contrast with the gospel of Jesus. A completely new culture has come to life and continues to grow in these cities. In this presentation this morning, I want to look at this emerging culture in the United States of America, emerging Catholic culture. We all are part of it. Sometimes what we don't know is how to best respond to these dynamics. I'm going to divide my reflections this morning in three moments. One, paradigmatic cultural and demographic changes. And I will echo some of the thoughts that Father Gaunt has shared this morning. Two, the role of religion, ways of being religious, and discerning religious commitment in our society today. And three, a fresher look at accompaniment for vocational discernment. More than an exhaustive treatment of these realities shaping Catholic life in the United States, I am treating this as a series of meditations. One, important paradigmatic cultural and demographic changes. The first change that perhaps is affecting most of our lives in the United States of America, in the American continent, and throughout the world is globalization. It's important for us to situate ourselves in that general context. we cannot ignore the fact that we are more interconnected than ever at this moment in history, and that is globalization. Technology, means of communications, intellectual life, cultural influence, intercultural interactions, the arts, etc. One of the key aspects in this process of globalization is what cultural studies scholars and observers call the rise of the global South. The rise of the global South, which challenges all presuppositions about who has more influence over whom. By the 1950s, it was pretty clear that Western Europe and North America were at the top of the game worldwide, no? And this particularly at the end of World War II. However, in the last 60, 70 years, what we are seeing is a shifting of powers all throughout the world, in which the South has become more prominent. And the influence of the South is reshaping, transforming many of the societies of the North. How do we see this? On the one hand, we have seen the emergence of new centers of intellectual and religious life. Before, most seminarians in the United States of America or in Latin America would be sent to study in Europe, primarily in Rome or Spain or France. Now, many religious orders are sending their students to the Philippines, Medellin, Colombia, Bogotá, Colombia, Rio de Janeiro, Mexico City, Santiago, Chile, and many other places. Some of these new institutions, and for instance, I know I'm more familiar with the Jesuits since I work at a Jesuit institution at Boston College, not Duquesne. So, sorry, I'm not big. But that's intentionally what the Jesuits and also many other religious orders are doing, intentionally going to what used to be called third world nations. Now we call them the global South. And these places have improved significantly their theological formation, their ministerial formation, to the point that many of the new generation of pastoral leaders today are having that influence that is not actually connected directly to Europe or North America, but Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But besides these centers of intellectual life, we are also seeing that Christianity, and particularly Catholicism, is growing not in the North America or Europe, but is growing primarily in that global South. For instance, 40% of all Catholics in the world live in Latin America, where I hail from. The continent where Christianity is growing the fastest in the world is Africa. So we should not be surprised that in the next 50 to 100 years, most ecclesial leaders throughout the world, theologians and other Catholic intellectuals, would come primarily from Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Father Gowan's presentation today was a clarion call for us to be looking into this dynamic. Another aspect related to globalization is the urbanization of our continent. America, not the country, but America, the continent, in the 1920s was about 75% rural. 75% of the population in the entire continent lived in rural areas. Fast forward 1 century, today about 85% of all people in Latin America lives in cities. 75% of people in the United States of America live in cities with more than 100,000 people. So there is an urgent need or an urgent demand for urban ministry. And the next generation of pastoral leaders, whether priests, sisters, lay ecclesial ministers, deacons, and so forth, most likely will come from the cities and will need to be prepared to work in urban ministry in this particular context. We are shifting quickly to urban ministry. Pope Francis brings attention to this dynamic in Evangelii Gaudium number 73 again. A completely new culture has come to life and continues to grow in the cities, he says. And a third sign of globalization is the economic interdependence of our nations and societies throughout the world that have major impact in the shaping and reshaping of societies today. When large economies shift, everybody is affected, whether the United States of America, the European Union, or China. Everyone is affected. And we see that impact more significantly when we look at migration patterns all throughout the world. We know that nowadays, at any given moment, more than 200 million people throughout the world are on the move, crossing transnational borders. 200 million people. So we also know that economic dynamics trigger migration patterns towards the United States of America from Latin America and the Caribbean. And we are already seeing this in these days when we see this large crowd of people coming from Honduras, but also from Central America, Mexico, and other parts of Latin America. Most of them are not invaders. These people are not invaders. Most of these people are coming because of the dire circumstances: poverty, persecution, lack of opportunities, violence, war. Immigrants from Europe did it 150 years ago. Exactly the same dynamic, fleeing from the same circumstances. So globalization is transforming this. Today, my area of research is primarily the Latino community. Today we know that about 20 million immigrants from Latin America and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean live in the United States, including me. 20 million. More than about 60% or so of those immigrants from Latin America self-identify as Roman Catholic. Hispanics are the largest factor transforming, reshaping Catholicism in this country. 2, in terms of the paradigm changes, technology and social media are redefining our way of entering in relationships and relating with one another. In 2016, researchers from Stanford University found that about 22% of heterosexual couples met through the internet, which constitutes the largest venue for couples to meet today in the United States of America, after 1, being introduced by friends, and 2, meeting in public places like bars, restaurants, parties, but not churches. Only 7% of heterosexual couples meet in churches, which is a fascinating dynamic. I actually met my wife in a parish. I was invited to mass, and I wasn't paying attention to mass, I guess. So, in the United States of America, about 214 million people are on Facebook. 214 million. That is 65% of 327 million, which is the entire population. 65%. The vast majority of adults and young people in this country are on Facebook. How many of you here are on Facebook? Okay, that pretty much proves that. How many of you are on Instagram? Okay, about half of you. How many of you tweet at least once a day? Oh, okay. So you opened the account and you forgot that you had one, or most likely. It happens sometimes, you know. But that's the brave new world. That's the brave new world in which, you know, we are living, and these are the paradigm changes. People, particularly younger people nowadays, are entering into relationship, developing communities, discerning the most important issues of life through technology and social media. One of my students, one day, you know, we were at an event, and she asked, "Can I take pictures?" And I said, "Sure, why?" And she said, "I have to put this on Facebook." And I said, "Why do you have to do that?" And she said, "If it is not on Facebook, it never happened," you know? That pretty much. According to Pew Research, the vast majority of adult Americans in this day has or owns a cell phone of some kind. 95% of adults own a cell phone of some kind. So notice that this estimate does not include people under 18. Another big paradigmatic change. When you do your vocational promotions, when you engage people, do you use technology and social media? If you are not doing this, most likely you're missing the boat, because that's how people are communicating these days. And the third paradigmatic change that I want to bring attention to is demographic changes among Catholics in the United States of America. Father Gaunt has already alluded to some of these changes. I just want to narrow down on a few of them. Until the 1940s or so, most immigrants into the United States of America, Catholic immigrants, came from Europe, from Western Europe. So for 150 years, Euro-American white Catholics dominated the Catholic picture in this country. To speak of Catholicism in the United States of America until the middle of the 20th century pretty much meant speaking about Euro-American Catholicism. We seldom spoke about black Catholics. We seldom spoke about Hispanic Catholics or Asian Catholics or Native American Catholics. That has changed dramatically. Why? Because it is these populations, black, Hispanic, and Asian, that are actually reshaping demographics in the United States of America. As I said earlier, about 20 million of Hispanics in the United States are immigrants, and the vast majority self-identify as Catholic. However, the majority of Latinos are not immigrant, which is a myth that is out there. Many of us still consider Latinos as a mainly immigrant population. That is not true. 2/3, 66% of all Hispanics in this country are US born. The vast majority of them English speaking. And somebody raised the question earlier about the undocumented population, and how do we reach out to that undocumented population? It is important, but if you think about it, when you are targeting young adults for vocations, you're speaking about a tiny sector of the Latino population, the undocumented population. The vast majority of undocumented women and men are older people, and many of them are married, have families, and so forth. The biggest chunk, or the biggest demographic block that we should be paying attention right now at this point in history is the US-born population, Latino population. It is estimated that about 60% of all Catholics in the United States under the age of 18 are Hispanic. And 94% of all Hispanics under 18 were born in this country. So you see the difference, no? You see the difference. This is why many of our organizations and institutions in the Catholic Church, I see this in many dioceses, doing an extra effort to target the immigrant population for vocational discernment. Keep doing that. But if you can, you need to redouble, triple, quadruple your efforts to start reaching out to the US-born population, because that's where most of the vocations, I believe, are at this very moment, and we'll see where the trends will take us. On the other hand, the downside of this is that US-born population is leaving the Catholic Church as we speak, So they are about half of them today do not self-identify as Roman Catholic. So if we were to paint a demographic map in this country, what we see here is that about 40% or so of Catholics in the United States of America are Hispanic. About 5% of Catholics in this country are Asian. And remember, Asians are the fastest growing group in the Catholic Church. About 4%, give or take, are African American. 0.78% would be Native American. And about half of all Catholics in this country would be white Euro-American. Demographers, I have asked tons of demographers, including Father Gaunt's colleagues, about what would be the exact number. There's not an exact number. We can all debate about this, but it could be a little bit more than 50%. It could be less than 50%. So technically, we are already in a church of minorities in many ways. That's what's happening. But what's most fascinating is that if we were to look at a Catholic cartography, in terms of demographics, since 2015, prior to 2015, more than half of all Catholics, the majority of Catholics in this country, lived in the Northeast and the Midwest. Today, as of 2015, most Catholics in the United States of America live in the South and the West. So start shifting your houses of formation to the South and the West. And that's where we need to start building seminaries. Why? I'll give you some stats. The stats that Father Gaunt shared with us are mind-blowing in many ways. Because notice the importance of Catholic schools. Notice the importance of Catholic colleges and universities. Notice the importance of all these Catholic institutions that foster volunteerism. Most of them, 71% of Catholic colleges and universities are located in the Northeast and the Midwest. 63% or so, 61% of Catholic schools in this country in the Northeast and the Midwest. Most religious orders have their seminaries, houses of formations, and headquarters in the Northeast and the Midwest. But the population is in the South and the West, which is going to require a major reshifting of resources and investment, Because unfortunately, Hispanics, when Father Gaunt was speaking about the impact of volunteerism, the impact of colleges and campus ministry and Catholic schools, I'm saddened to hear that, because in all those instances, Hispanics are barely present or totally absent. Only 4% of Hispanic school-age Catholics attend Catholic schools. 4%. 96%, about 2% go to private schools of other kinds. About 94% of Hispanics go to public schools. And of those, more than 80% go to underperforming schools. These are our children, because the majority of them are Roman Catholic. Only 11% of the student population in Catholic colleges and universities is Hispanic. Only 11%. And we're speaking about a very small population. We're talking about a total of 110,000 students who are Hispanic. This gives you a perspective. If what Father Gaunt has told us is working for many Catholics, is not working for Latinos. Why? Because Latinos are not present in these places. And that's why we need to start expanding our horizon. 2, the role of religion, ways of being religious and discerning religious commitment in today's society. We are witnessing an ambivalence regarding contemporary attitudes toward religion. About half a century ago, philosophers, scholars of religion, and cultural critics prematurely anticipated that we would begin the second millennium in the West as a post-religious society. Wrong. They were only half right. It is true that Europe considers itself today as a post-Christian continent, but that doesn't mean that religion is dead. As a matter of fact, it's very much alive and is returning in many ways. Secularization in the United States of America has increased dramatically. In 1991, about 3% of the US population self-identified as secularized. Today, 2018, about 25% of the US population self-identified as secularized. We call them today the nones, non-religiously affiliated. So, even though secularization has increased dramatically, religion continues to play a major role defining private and public life in our society. One of the challenges that we have today that affects directly vocational discernment is the fact that religion continues to be perceived as a private affair for individuals. As a private affair. It is my relationship with God. Even among Catholics. As Catholics joined mainstream, we have embraced the individualism of mainstream significantly. Whether we are more progressive or more conservative, individualism cuts across all these divides. Also, this individualism vis-a-vis religion is affecting immigrant groups that in principle, bring a communal and more public dimension to faith. We heard it earlier about processions and popular religion and so forth. Yet, the second and third generation are quickly embracing the individualism that characterizes the larger society. Why? Because we're leaving them alone. We're leaving them alone. We're not walking with them. We're not journeying with them. We're beginning to see in the Latino community, especially this second and third generation, a significant number of Latinos, Latinas that are replicating exactly the same cultural patterns and values of mainstream Catholics and mainstream society. We're beginning. So if Latinos and Asians who are Catholic are the hope and the future of Catholicism in this country from a more communal perspective, not accompanying these young women and men is actually a process of self-defeating. We're self-defeating ourselves. A growing phenomenon in our society is the politicization of religion and the manipulation of religious principles to advance political and ideological agendas. While Christianity has always espoused forms of public theology and participation in the larger society, we are witnessing a co-optation of religion and traditionally religious values for political, corporate, and individual gain at the expense of religious institutions. This is manifested in expressions of ideological polarization in the so-called culture wars that is tearing apart Catholic Church. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book for a chapter on polarization in the Catholic Church, and in that chapter I told the story as an immigrant. I was born in Colombia, South America. As an immigrant to the United States, I was studying theology, and we were debating in my class, theology class, and I don't recall the issue, but I remember that my professor point blank asks me the question, Hosffman, what are you? Conservative or liberal? And I scratched my head, and back then I had hair. So I scratched my head and I said, I don't know. I'm Catholic. That's all I can say. That was my response. But today, those labels are tearing us apart. And you are absolutely right, Father. You know, we are allowing politics to take the primacy over our faith, values, moral values. Ecclesial scandals, like the sexual abuse of children on the part of clergy and the practices to cover this evil up, continue to undermine the credibility not only of religious institutions, but also of any person who considers himself or herself religious. I serve on a number of boards of Catholic education at the national and local level, and what we are discussing in the last few days is we're beginning to see that families are hesitating to send their children to Catholic schools today because they are asking themselves, are Catholic schools safe places for our children? This is undermining the best that we have, and we need to talk about it. But not everything is negative. We must also affirm the good that religious institutions are doing, particularly Catholic institutions. On the one hand, we have education. In less than 2 centuries, Catholics in the United States built more than 13,000 Catholic elementary secondary schools, more than 300 colleges and universities, and countless houses of formation, seminaries, and pastoral institutes. This is beautiful. All these places together contributed significantly to the formation of an army of highly educated Catholics who would go on to exercise in leadership within the ranks of the church. Sisters, priests, bishops, deacons, theologians, lay pastoral leaders, heads of major Catholic organizations, and in the wider society, like educators, politicians, healthcare workers, lawyers, business people, artists, intellectuals, etc. Just by a show of hand, how many of you were educated in a Catholic school? That proves to your point, Father, earlier. No? Notice this. However, today, when we look at the diversity of today's generation, those diverse faces are not in those Catholic schools. Just keep in mind. They have worked, but not everybody has been there. On the other hand, we have the commitment to social services, which is a beautiful expression of public life of our faith. Catholics in the United States have developed some of the most efficient and widespread networks of social services, giving life and opportunity to millions of people in this country. One cannot minimize the impact of Catholic Charities, for instance, the second largest provider of social services after the US government. The generosity of US Catholics in the international arena is clearly channeled by the work of Catholic Relief Services, an organization that not only distributes tens of millions of dollars in aid every year, coming from Catholic households and individuals, but also manages hundreds of millions more as it partners with various governments throughout the world. Catholic Extension Society has clearly become the lifeline for many projects, serving almost half of all dioceses in the United States considered mission dioceses. As of 2018, about 654 Catholic hospitals and 1,634 Catholic long-term care and other health facilities in all 50 states made Catholic Health Ministry the largest group of non-profit healthcare providers in the nation. And I could go on and on and on and on. This is young people, older people, inspired by their Catholic faith and commitment, serving in the church, many of them priests and sisters. The discernment of religious commitment somehow occurs in the middle of these ambivalent realities and attitudes associated with religion. As women and men concerned about how we invite a new generation of Catholics to serve church and society in light of their faith, we cannot ignore those realities and attitudes. In fact, we must know about them, we have to study them, we have to understand them and accompany the new generations to discern their calling to service as a response to them, instead of resisting them. Let me conclude or say more about accompaniment, which is the third and final section of this presentation. A fresher look at accompaniment. Usually, when we speak of accompaniment in the context of vocational discernment, we tend to think of the qualities that the director of vocations or the recruiter must have accompanying a potential candidate to religious life or the priesthood, the diaconate, or lay ecclesial ministry. And there is truth to it. However, I would like us this morning to shift the focus from one that starts with the individual, whether the director or the candidate, to one that starts with how we embrace one another as a community. My argument here is that it is that communal embrace, whether in the family, the parish, the school, the religious order, or any other similar setting, what will create the most optimal conditions of possibility for vocational discernment in our day. In one particular community, if one particular community knows itself as left out, or rejected, or disenfranchised, chances are that few or no members from that community want to dedicate their lives to service to an institution that left them out, rejected them, or disenfranchised them. You see? That's the challenge, that's the pickle in which we are today. That many black Catholics, many Hispanic Catholics, many Asian Catholics, many white Catholics who are poor are disenfranchised and feel betrayed by their institution. How can we expect that these people are going to consider a vocation to religious life or the priesthood or any other form of service in the church? This is why the approach needs to be communal. From a communal perspective, therefore, we can speak of accompaniment in four different ways. One, accompaniment as discerning the call to holiness in the here and now of our everyday existence, la realidad. No one discerns a vocation to service in the abstract. We all are beholden by our own realities, nuestras realidades. And these realities matter. As a Latino, reality, being a Latino in the United States matters. Being black in the United States matters. Being a middle-class Catholic in the United States matters. And all that shapes the way we discern vocation. These realities form us. They shape our commitments and sensibilities. In a diverse church, therefore, it is important that we understand the realidad, the reality of those whom we are invited to discern a vocation to ecclesial service. We cannot pretend that people are going to leave their entire lives and their cultures behind to become something they are not. This past September, I launched a national study of of vocations among Latinos, and we just began to set the framework. And in the next few months, we'll be engaging different organizations, including CARA, in this process. But in some of the informal conversations that I have had with former seminarians, I've been asked, Latino seminarians, I've been asking them, why did you leave the seminary? And besides the natural discernment, about religious life or priesthood that anyone goes through, one of the items that is emerging to the top of the list is, I felt that nobody at the seminary cared about me as a Latino and my culture and my people. How can we keep people in a seminary if that's the case? If young people, whether men or women in these houses of formation, do not feel affirmed. We must affirm the instances in which people encounter God in the everyday. Popular Catholicism is important, and Father Gown has said it very clearly. We cannot simply assume that the religious experience of the predominant community needs to be imposed upon every single other group. We need to understand that in a diverse church, there are many ways of encountering God, discerning God, and celebrating God. 2. Accompaniment as the standard modus operandi of evangelization of the church. Pope Francis says in Evangelii Gaudium, genuine spiritual accompaniment always begins and flourishes in the context of service to the mission of evangelization. This is why, close quote, this is why we have an obligation to be present in those places where Latinos are, where the new generations are. When we do Catholic recruitment for Catholic schools, when we do recruitment for vocations, the last group of parishes that usually gets visited are Latino parishes and parishes serving Black Catholics. We are over-investing, and this is something that I'm tracking with my research assistants. We are investing and over-investing in campus ministry in Catholic colleges so we can get as many vocations or invite people to discern vocations. But I see little to nothing in many dioceses of vocational offices investing in parishes with Hispanic ministry. Well, guess what? There are 5,000 parishes, or close to 5,000 parishes in this country with ministry to Hispanics. We should be investing there because most likely the vocations of the next few decades are already there. We need to go there. Evangelization. An evangelizing community, needs to be patient and needs to work with the communities that it's serving. One of the challenges that we have in the United States of America as Catholics is that we are very pragmatistic. We are heirs of a pragmatistic society. We want things overnight. We want people to learn a second language in 3 weeks. We want people to become fully Americanized in 6 months. Well, that's not going to happen. An evangelizing community, says Pope Francis, is supportive, standing by people at every step of the way. No matter how difficult or lengthy this may prove to be, it is familiar with patient expectation and apostolic endurance. Evangelization consists mostly of patience and disregard for constraints of time. 3. Accompaniment as prophetic solidarity. Let me cite again Pope Francis. If we encounter a person sleeping outdoors on a cold night, I can view him or her as an annoyance, an idler, or obstacle in my path, trouble inside, or problem for politicians to sort out, or even a piece to refuse cluttering a public space. Or I can respond with faith and charity and see in this person a human being with a dignity identical to my own. That is what it is to be a Christian, says the Pope. Can holiness somehow be understood apart from this lively recognition of the dignity of each human being? Well, we are at a time in the history of Catholicism in the United States in which we again are being challenged to see the face of Christ in every brother and sister who comes to our faith communities. And many of these brothers and sisters are people of color. Many of them are undocumented. Many of them are poor. Accompaniment demands that we see each other as sisters and brothers journeying together, not as enemies, not as competitors, because that's how sometimes we see ourselves in our parishes, competing for resources and attention and institutions. Accompaniment demands that we recognize our children and our youth as our children. I recently published a book on ministry with Hispanic youth and young adults, and the title of the book is Our Children. And I opened the book with the following preface telling the story. This is a story of two high-ranking pastoral leaders. I didn't want to use the word bishops. So these high-ranking pastoral leaders are having a conversation in the Southwest. And this is a true story. One of them is Hispanic, the other one is white, Euro-American. And then the white priest, the Anglo-pastoral leader, tells his brother bishop, his Hispanic bishop, I am very concerned about my diocese. The Hispanic pastoral leader says, why? He says, because the population is declining. Because the population is getting old, resources are dwindling, and young people are not coming to our parishes. And then the Hispanic pastoral leader says, I thought that your diocese was doing much, much better. Because based on what I know, the Hispanic population has almost tripled in your diocese since the year 2000, and as a matter of fact, it outnumbers the white population, the white Catholic population. And then the Anglo pastoral leader responded, if you count Hispanics, it is a different story. And it's a true story. We need to change that because we hear that all the time. We treat Latinos and Black and Asians and immigrants and Catholics who are poor as the other story. There will not be efficient vocational recruitment or evangelization until we start accompanying one another as one church. That's the prophetic. And that means that we raise our voices as a church when it is necessary to protest the injustices against our sisters and brothers who are Catholic. Archbishop Jose Gomez from Los Angeles many times have said, Hispanics feel alone when it comes down to battle immigration dynamics in the South and the West. One of the groups that is most vocal about opposing immigration reform in the Southwest happens to be white Catholics. So we're alone if we don't see ourselves, and we need to raise these prophetic voices. Finally, accompaniment as breaking bread. The word accompaniment comes from the three Latin words, ad cum panem, which can be translated sharing bread with others. That's accompaniment. It is in breaking bread that we express the authenticity of being Christian. We break bread as Catholics celebrating the Eucharist. But we need more priests, without a doubt, particularly from the communities that are transforming Catholicism in the United States. Only 3% of priests in this country are Hispanic. And of those Hispanic priests, 85% are foreign-born. We need to do much more. We also need more women and men who share the bread of the word through catechesis, through preaching, through teaching. Only 3% of sisters in this country are Hispanic, and more than 90% of them are foreign-born. Celebrating, we break bread, celebrating with a renewed sense of fiesta, giving thanks for the presence of the diverse other. And we need to be careful not to reduce the other, as we break bread with that other, to a commodity. We welcome Latinos because it is convenient to fill our churches. We welcome Latinos or bring people from Asia, from Africa, because we need extra help. We welcome these minority groups or minoritized groups because we need numbers. These people are not commodities. They are our sisters and brothers, and we need to start thinking that way, So it's important for us. And finally, we break bread by feeding those who are hungry and vulnerable. 2/3 of Hispanics live in poverty in the United States of America. 2/3. A full third lives in deep poverty. How many of us are doing vocational recruitment among those Latinos, Latinas who are living in deep poverty? If we focus only on campus ministry and focus only on the middle, upper class communities, we're missing the boat. We're missing the boat. Another third of Latinos barely make it. So we need to start looking at, breaking bread with those people where God may be calling many to service. Many black Catholics are struggling mightily. As a matter of fact, almost silently, in the last 2-3 decades, we have closed about half of all black churches in this country. Who's raising their voice? We are not. We are not. So there's that decline. Immigrant Catholics from Asia are being left out because we have shifted our attention to the overachievers, to those who have college degrees, to the professionals. But millions of Asian Catholics in this country are being left behind. People are leaving our church because they are not being fed physically and spiritually. To conclude, vocations to ecclesial service will flourish when the institutional church and the organizations that foster vocational discernment make the intentional commitment to accompany all the groups that are transforming the U.S. Catholic experience and truly engage with prophetic voice and joyful solidarity the realities that shape the everyday lives of those groups. Plucking one or two individuals from those groups, pardon the image, plucking them from their group, from their communities to prepare them to service in the church is rather easy. But we do not need only one or two individuals and we can check our boxes for diversity. We need a movement. We need a new wave of vocations to ecclesial service. And this is only going to happen when these groups know not only that they are welcomed, quote unquote, into existing structures, but that they have a voice because they are the church as well. So this is an invitation to continue to discern to what extent our initiatives of vocational discernment take seriously the experience, the questions, the concerns, and the realities of all these groups. This is an invitation to revise our ministerial formation curricula. This is an invitation to go from mere maintenance of structures that have been in place for decades, maybe for centuries, and open ourselves up to the work of the Holy Spirit, to fresher ways of accompanying and discerning vocations in the church with a missionary spirit. May God give us the willingness to read the signs of the times in our day and to respond to the challenges of this day with wisdom as we accompany a new generation of diverse women and men in their vocational discernment. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts.